My stroke happened in January 2006 when I was in Mumbai. I woke up one morning. I'd been sick in the middle of the night. I woke up at 6 in the morning and I was feeling disorientated. I couldn't speak for a while, and I wasn't aware what my right hand was doing. Doctors found that my carotid artery had a dissection or a cut in the lumen, and the clot had detached and gone to the brain. So that's the reason for the stroke. Why the cut in the carotid artery is something they cannot pinpoint, but it happened. Apparently, it happens to those under 40, but the incidence is fairly low. And I happen to be one of the minority who suffered from it. Because of my father's stroke a few years before, I was aware that I needed to be aware of the risk factors, and try and obviously contain the risks associated. So I was relatively careful in the way I eat, in exercising, in keeping my weight in check, and maybe that contributed to the recovery, but fortunately I fully recovered from it.
South Asian communities, so if you're from an Indian, Pakistani or Bangladeshi background, you're probably more at risk of stroke because of illnesses such as diabetes, which is up to about 5 times more likely within South Asian communities. And again, diabetes is a higher risk factor for stroke. Also, things like high blood pressure and smoking are high risk factors for stroke as well. So if you smoke and are from a South Asian background, if you have high blood pressure and you're from a South Asian background, and if you have diabetes and you're from a South Asian background, then you have an increased risk of having a stroke. When you look at, say, the Bangladeshi community, risk factors such as smoking are quite high compared to the Indian and Pakistani communities. So again, there are sort of general risk factors such as the diabetes and the high blood pressure, but it's also important to look at issues around smoking as well. My advice to people from South Asian backgrounds is to make sure that they're having their blood pressure checked, because it is the single highest risk factor for stroke. And again, make sure that their diabetes is under check if they do have diabetes. So making sure that they're going to their diabetic clinics, again, having their blood pressure checked as well. If you smoke, it's really important to get advice on smoking cessation and trying to quit. Again, there are things like Asian Quitline, which can again provide you with information in your own language.
I was aware that the South Asian population suffers from a higher incidence and risk of strokes, as it does for heart disease and diabetes as well. My father was a doctor, my brother is a doctor, so I'm in an environment where I'm aware of these kind of issues. And from a fairly sort of young age, I've been fairly health conscious. I watch what I eat. I'm very careful about my fat consumption, sugar consumption. I exercise regularly, try and keep my weight in check. So I subconsciously am trying to manage the risk factors. I was advised by doctors that had I not led a healthier lifestyle, the stroke could have been a lot worse, and I may not have recovered to the extent that I did. That has also brought home a point that I need to ensure that I continue maintaining my healthy lifestyle, watch what I eat, watch how I lead my lifestyle, try not to exert too much stress or strain on myself, watch my weight, ensure that I go through regular checkups in order to ensure that the risk or the incidence of a stroke does not happen again. Because I've also been advised that once you've had a mini stroke or a stroke, the chances of getting another stroke are a lot higher than the average population.
it's really important to also try and reduce the amount of fried foods that you're having. So making sure that you're looking at your diet as well. A lot of Asian communities across the board, whether you're from Pakistan or from India or from Bangladesh, tend to have a lot of fried foods. So you really need to cut down on your fried foods, saturated fats, and trying to increase your intake of fruit and vegetables. And we've all heard the 5-a-day message of 5 fruit and veg during the day. Another thing that you really need to be careful about is your intake of salt. People don't often realise how much salt they're having during the day, and the government actually recommends 6 grams of salt. And if you think about what 6 grams of salt look like, it's actually a teaspoon. Level teaspoon. So if you look at the amount of processed food that you're eating, a lot of those salts are hidden in processed foods. Again, when you're cooking, we tend to add salt to food whilst cooking, and also once the food is ready, we tend to add salt and then taste the food instead of tasting the food first. So there's a sort of psychological message that's going through there as well. So making sure that you're aware of what you're buying, how you're cooking the food that you're buying, and then what you're doing to it, once it's reached the dinner table, and making sure you're not adding anything to it. For people from South Asian communities, it's really important to make sure that you actually think about what you're doing to your fruit and veg as well. So making sure that you're not overcooking vegetables, because a lot of the nutrients can be lost that way, and not deep frying foods. Again, my advice would be for you to make sure that you are referred to a dietitian if you do have issues around your diet. You can go to your GP to get advice around that. Again, there's lots of information out there in your GP surgery and local pharmacies. If you feel that you do have issues around diabetes, if you think you aren't controlling your diabetes properly, you can get advice from your GP, or you can get advice from your local pharmacies. They have a lot of information there that they can help you with. You can also have your blood pressure checked in many pharmacies as well, so you can always go in and have a chat to them and ask them if they provide that service. Making sure that if you are going to have your blood pressure checked, please ask the pharmacist or the GP or the practice nurse what your blood pressure is, because a lot of people that I've come across, when you ask them what their blood pressure is, they'll say it's okay, but when you ask them and you sort of try and get an answer from them as to what that blood pressure is, they won't have a clue. So it's really important to have that sort of knowledge so that you can, in a sense, take control of your own life and take control of your own health, so that if you do have high blood pressure and you know what high blood pressure is and you know what your reading is, that you're able to do something about it instead of relying on people around you to make changes for you.
I think as a stroke sufferer or as a patient, one has to be, or you have to be very aware of managing all the risks. And that includes the blood pressure or the stress levels. I think you have to ensure that under any situation you do not get stressed up, because at the end of the day, if you do, your blood pressure shoots up, there is a greater chance of having another stroke. But in the long run, I find that my faith helps me manage the stress. And I'm told, and I was advised to do this as well, and that is to do a bit of yoga on a regular basis. Because what yoga does is that it treats not just the body, but it also treats the mind, so to speak. And the mind and the body work together. So if your mind is at ease, a lot of your bodily conditions are also not exacerbated.
Also, if you do drink a lot of alcohol, so if you're in excess of what the government recommends you should be having, you are increasing your risk of stroke. Again, I don't want to be a killjoy and say that you can't have any whatsoever. It's about staying within your recommended levels. The government actually recommends no more than 2 to 3 units for women a day and no more than 3 to 4 units a day for men. And just to let you know what 1 unit looks like, it's a small glass of wine or half a pint of beer. It's just being aware of how much you're drinking and trying not to drink your full week's quota maybe in one day or around a particular event. So just making sure that you're aware of what you're having. The Stroke Association has actually developed a Preventing a Stroke leaflet into 5 different South Asian languages. So if you do speak either Hindi, Bengali, Gujarati, Urdu, or Punjabi, you can actually access the information that we provide around preventing a stroke and reducing your risk. And if you don't actually read the language that you speak, we do have a CD audio version of the Preventing a Stroke leaflet, again in those languages. So if you aren't able to read the language, you can still access the same information.
I don't want to be one of the statistics where in a year or 2 years I may have another stroke. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I still need to be around for her for a few years. So I guess the motivating factor in ensuring that I do my utmost to maintain my health in good shape is my daughter.
If you'd like to know more about stroke and the Stroke Association, you can call our helpline number on 0845 30 33 100 and speak in confidence to one of our friendly helpline staff. Your call will be charged at a local rate. If you would like to speak to the Stroke Association Stroke Helpline in your own language, you can use the Language Line telephone interpreting service. All you have to do is get someone who speaks English to call our stroke helpline and tell us your name, telephone number, and the language you speak, and we'll arrange for an interpreter to help with your call.